Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and welcome back to Goose Junkies, episode 19. We are glad that you all are back for tonight's episode because we are talking about camp horror, specifically stories centered around campfires or campfire legends. And we have decided to share with you all the Haunting Hours Dreamcatcher, and we're going to be facing that episode off against a classic Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, The Tale of Watcher's Woods. I'm joined tonight with Micah and BD. BD, how are you doing tonight?
Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night. It is your boy BD talking about scary things in the woods. My house is actually right by a forest preserve, so I know all about the dark things in the woods. You got hillbillies in there, you got people making moonshine, you got a 7 foot tall ape man with more followers than Taylor Swift. And this season in Chicago, we got a cicada invasion. That's right. There is a load ton of cicadas that are flying around these woods. And true story, by the way, ABC Chicago 7 News Channel said that these cicadas are getting infected by a fungus that is making them into sex crazed zombies. Yeah, that's actually what the fungus does to them. So, you know what? These cicadas and my ex girlfriend finally have something in common. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, that was amazing. And then we're joined as well with Micah. How are you doing tonight, Micah?
I'm doing great. Just getting to watch one of my favorite Haunting Hour episodes and getting to watch a new dark episode and just, getting to expose myself to some more horror media.
Nice, nice. And as usual, we are not joined with Spongy 444 tonight, but we will be sharing his written thoughts throughout the video, and we'll put the link to his family's GoFundMe in the description. If y'all can please help out his family in a time of need, that would be much appreciated on his behalf. So, with that out the way, we have Campfire Tales and Are You Afraid of the Dark and The Haunting Hour. And, I kind of want to start this off because both of these shows have a lot of symmetry to them. And I think we've mentioned this in the past where when we compared the mascot episode to The Tale of Jake the Snake, that the haunting hour literally felt like the continuation of Are You Afraid of the Dark, that 7 season run they had in the 90s and early 2000s. But the haunting hour kind of took from it and made it better. And in this case, I think the discussion we're going to have tonight is going to possibly reflect it, but it's also going to be interesting because I think Are You Afraid of the Dark might have some gas in the tank and some legit good things to bring to the table. So let's start off with Dreamcatcher. Who wants to take over Dreamcatcher and talk about it? All right, BD, tell us about Dreamcatcher.
So obviously, I did not grow up with Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark. I'm not that old. Shout out to Completionist. But I did grow up with Haunting Hour. I watched it on a weekly basis, and this was an episode that scared the daylights out of me as a kid. And I know a lot of people who watch Haunting Hour felt the same way when they watched it if they were younger. Dreamcatcher is basically about an all-girl summer camp. You have the main character who's a very quiet, sort of shy girl. She feels very nervous going to this summer camp, and she meets this other girl who I believe's name is Amelia. This girl is very sort of kind and nice and shy as well, but she's been to this camp before, so she tries to make friends with the main girl. And then you got this brat girl, this third girl that's the main character in the story, and she's terrible. She's mean. She's an only child. Her parents sent her over here because they got work to do. So she comes back and she thinks that the camp is super lame. She's not excited to interact with anybody. And it's hinted that she used to be friends with Amelia, but Amelia decided to basically turn away from her because she saw her true colors. So they've sort of been having some beef. And there's a little bit of tension between Amelia, the main girl, and this girl because two of them try to get along and the other one tries to basically interfere. So when they get to this all girls summers camp, typical stuff, you got all these events planned out like canoeing, archery, and stuff. But the first day, they actually end up making dream catchers. They make these dream catchers, and you find out that the main girl is very talented at making them. She ends up getting a little bit of the spotlight, which makes that pretentious girl a little bit angry. And at night, when they're sleeping in their bunks for this cabin, that mean girl has a really creepy scene where she basically raises her head over the bed in the dark and just stares at her menacingly, which is a creepy scene. And she basically tells her this urban legend that happened at this camp. The urban legend involved a girl who ended up having nonstop nightmares every single day that she was at the camp. And the nightmares got so bad because she said that there was a reoccurring boogeyman figure that would appear every night in her dreams and try to take her away. And she said it was a spider like creature, this horrifying entity that the mean girl doesn't really know the name of. So she deems this figure the Dreamcatcher. She makes it up on the spot. And she tells the story that this girl, because she couldn't sleep, started getting insomnia. And one day she died of exhaustion. She just straight up collapsed. And when the camp counselors and other people found her, she had this wide eyed, glassy look on her face, this moment of basically screaming as if she saw something terrifying. And it's hinted that because this girl was hallucinating, doing to get insomnia, this boogeyman may have visited her moments before her death. And now, as eternal purgatory, she might have to deal with that figure now in the afterlife. So, really horrifying stuff. And what makes it scarier is the camp counselor lady who's running this camp. She doesn't deny that this is a fake urban legend. Apparently, a girl did die in a similar fashion back in the day, but they don't have the full details because it was really before any of these people knew. It was like back in the day in the early, I guess, like 1900s or something. So then, as the story continues, you find out that the mean girl, actually out of jealousy, ended up cutting the main girl and her friend's Dreamcatcher. She cut the little spider ball out of it, and some horrifying things start happening. The main girl starts dealing with nightmares very similar to the urban legend, and she starts seeing this potentially horrifying boogeyman figure. There's one night where she gets up out of bed, she has a really eerie feeling, and you see this dark, menacing skeleton hand come out with these foot-long fingers just reaching, over her like a sleep paralysis demon. And when she turns around, the hand is gone. And then when she goes next morning, and you can tell she's kind of exhausted and tired, she finds out that her new friend Amelia is having the exact same nightmares. And the nightmares involve them getting taken to this cave in the woods filled with spider webs where this Spider-Man boogeyman like creature called the Dreamcatcher is there to basically consume them. So they start getting more and more haunted by the nightmares. They keep losing sleep. The mean girl is basically putting them through a lot of hard odds. Like they end up having to stay up the entire night, and then she makes them go through some like hard camp activities like canoeing. So they're basically going straight to exhaustion. And they're scared that as soon as we get to the point of, we can't stay awake any longer, this thing is going to take us and it's going to be too late. So that's essentially the story of the Dreamcatcher. This is easily one of the creepiest episodes in the Haunting Hour. First and foremost, let's talk about the villain. The Dreamcatcher is absolutely horrifying. He's got this Edward Scissorhands, scarier Danny DeVito, the penguin type of face, all white makeup, viciously sharp teeth. He's got this one sort of kind of alive eye. It's got like a pupil in it, and then one just straight dead eye, like there's no pupil in it. He looks horrifying. He's got this long, basically hair that makes him look like the villain from the Sinister movies. If you've ever seen the movies Sinister, you know what I'm talking about. And he's got these giant spider-like appendages. There's like these 10-foot long arms and stuff. And again, he lives in this cave that's filled with spider webs. And there's the urban legend that, the dream catcher, where as soon as you get caught in the spider web, the place of the boogeyman, he's going to basically take care of you in your dreams. And the dream catcher really is like the kids' horror version of Freddy Krueger. You got a lot of similar stuff where the girl wakes up with scratches on her arm, and that sort of reminded me of Nightmare on Elm Street when Freddy leaves the wounds with his finger knives. It's got that whole thing about the dream catcher stealing your good dreams, causing you to get sleep paralysis every night. And it is brutal seeing these girls lose sleep. There's something effective about having these really innocent, shy girls basically suffering like that. Like you can tell that they're exhausting themselves. They're really scared. And when you hear that, every single day they have to go through these exhausting physical activities of the camp and then go back to their bunks and pray that they don't fall asleep, it's really horrifying and it's really scary. And the urban legend in the story involving the boogeyman is one of the scariest things I've ever heard. The fact that you could lose sleep, that you could die of insomnia, and this demon like entity would come after you if you ended up falling asleep is horrifying. I really like the camp setting to this. There's something really good about camp settings that we're going to talk about later in our discussion video, where when you have kids that are taken away from their parents, taken away from guardians, and basically left isolated, you really start to feel that there's stakes in this, that they have to figure out a way to get out of this because nobody else can help them. They have nobody who believes them. The camp counselors really can't do anything. They don't take it seriously. And the only other person who does believe in it is a girl who's purposefully going out of her way to harass and bully them. So they're put up against the odds. It's a tough situation. And that's what makes this episode so damn scary and creepy. But it does have its problems. And I do want to highlight this. I don't know what it is, but when I was younger, this episode to me felt more fleshed out, had better pacing. And then I saw it as an adult. And although the first half of the episode is good, I would even say like three-fourths of the episode is pretty much fine. The last 30% of this episode, 25% of this episode is rushed. It's got some bad editing in there. There's these jump cut sequences. It feels like dialogue is sped up just to get through with it. When you actually get to this horrifying cave full of spider webs, it's creepy, but it feels like they're trying to rush for time. It feels like the characters aren't really going through any stakes at that point, and the ending abruptly just cuts off. And the ending is memorable. You got one of the best lines ever in kids horror from the villain, where he basically tells one of the girls, she's basically screaming her head off, and she tries to convince herself, "I'm awake. I'm awake. This is a bad dream. I'm awake. I'm gonna wake up." And he's like, "If you were awake, I wouldn't be here." And I was like, "All right, Mr. Black Air Forces, that is some sinister lines getting dropped there." But the pacing is just not that good. You just get rushed through it. It feels like they ran out of time. And I don't know why. Maybe there's a director's cut out there that had better pacing. Maybe they had an outline that would have fleshed out more things. And I wish we could have gotten that, because there are some episodes that did get alternate cuts, like Scarecrow, like Spaceman, I think. So I wish we could have got that. We didn't. So overall, I'd probably give this episode an 8.8 out of 10. This used to be in my top 5 Haunting Hour episodes, but upon rewatching it, the jump cut editing and pacing towards the end kind of makes it feel lackluster. But that being said, it's one of the scariest episodes ever, has one of the best villains, has a great urban legend, and really embodies a good camp story. So those are my thoughts. So let's hear what the other guys think.
All right, great way to start this. Micah, why don't you add on? What's your thoughts about Dreamcatcher?
Well, as I mentioned before, this is one of my favorite Haunting Hour episodes of all time. It's easily a top 5 for me personally. It's one that scared me to death as a kid, as it did for a lot of us, I feel, who saw it young when we were younger. And it's just a really special episode to me. Like, there's just a lot of really great elements to it. As like I mentioned, the creature design, terrifying, probably the scariest monster design in Haunting Hour, I would say. That alongside like the pumpkin heads, which is probably the other scariest episode of the show. But just the way he's designed, almost like this Marilyn Manson spider thing, is just like really creepy. And just like even the way he moves, even though there's like that really crappy jump cut edit stuff, like the way he moves throughout the cabin is really unsettling. And like, I don't know, especially and like the scene where he's walking towards them in the spider web is really just, I don't know why it gets under my skin. But like, this the whole Nightmare on Elm Street idea is like I'm a huge Nightmare on Elm Street fan. It's my favorite horror franchise. So like while this is a ripoff of it, I still do love it just for that reason that it shares those parallels to it. It's almost as I always saw it's like it's Nightmare on Elm Street meets Sleepaway Camp. That's kind of how I've kind of viewed it. I think the characters are all really well done. I think, Meg is kind of one of those characters you absolutely despise the whole episode. So while you do kind of he does kind of cut at the end, and spoiler alert, it is very satisfying for when she gets her inevitable karma at the end. And like, again, I don't know, there's a lot of really eerie atmosphere. I think the earlier dream sequences are really creepy. Like the scene where she comes across all the counselors in the Dreamcatcher makeup just scared me a lot. The campfire sequence was really eerie. Like how there's a scene there was an old lady who swallowed a fly, and like all of them like start slowly like closing in on Lisa, and then she turns around and then the Dreamcatcher's behind her. Like that scene was really well done and effective and just really eerie, and just I think the camp looks great. The whole I don't know. There's just something that really is special to me about this episode. And while I do agree that the editing is pretty rough in the last like act of the movie or in the episode, it's still just something that it doesn't bother me as much, and I still love the episode no matter what. And I give it like probably a 9.5 out of 10, honestly.
You know, I like that both of you points wise are not too far apart, because I struggle with this episode myself. I loved this episode when I first saw it. I was in high school when The Haunting Hour came out. And I'll tell you this, The Haunting Hour managed to do something that no other show was able to do when I was in high school. It made me go to my DVR and record every episode so I can watch it because I was intrigued by how the show was just constantly putting out content that made me think about how much I loved Goosebumps and possibly kids horror at the time, but also the fact that the Haunting Hour was kind of evolving kids horror at the same time. In the Dreamcatcher episode, when I first watched it, I said, this has to be the scariest kids horror episode ever made. I don't care what show we're talking, Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, The Nightmare Room, whatever came before it. This episode put it stamped down and said, nah, I'm scarier. And I was convinced that Dreamcatcher was the best episode for many years. Rewatching it now, it has a lot of technical props. There's nothing wrong with the concept, the story, the acting, the makeup effects, the setting, even though the setting, it's still the same recycled woods you see in Dead Body and Spores and all those episodes. It's the Haunting Hour. It's kind of famous for doing that. But there's no problems on any of that stuff. Where it comes down to is the handling of whatever was recorded in the editing process. All of the problems of this episode came down to the editors and or the people, the higher ups that possibly neutered this episode. Yes, I am highly convinced that Dreamcatcher has a director's cut out there. And I think we talked about this before we got on to record. Because of how choppy the editing sequences are in that back half of the episode, it just feels like, especially the bunk scene with Lisa when she goes to the bathroom and she interacts with the Dreamcatcher and she realizes that she's asleep. That whole sequence, like BD brought up, he thought that was longer when he was a kid. I thought it was longer too, but rewatching it is less than a minute and it's zooming by a bunch of different scenes. There's even a scene where he's in the bathroom and the next frame, he's in a bunk bed sucking a dream out of a kid. And I'm like, this is the first time I ever noticed that, like in real time. And I'm like, where did this stuff come from? How is he eating dreams from the Dreamcatcher one? That's never really talked about in the story. And it just feels kind of random. And it made me think about the whole episode. I'm like, I wonder what else possibly was cut out of this episode. Because there seems to be pieces of possible other cuts or maybe the original cut in that final product, but there's no tangible connections to those things, like the Dreamcatcher bit where he's eating the dreams. There's even a sequence where he can shapeshift early on, where he's posing as other people. That's like never really done again. He kind of takes his true form for the rest of the episode. And I'm like, okay, well, what happened with that? I mean, there's just so much, ambiguity from the editing on that aspect that it makes me upset in some ways because of how sloppy it comes across. And then, like BD brought up, the ending itself, I really feel like the ending was not what they wanted to do, or possibly not the original ending, because how short it is, it just feels like the episode has this grand pace, and then you get to the ending, and then it just comes to a screeching halt and ends. And I'm like, okay, I really don't, I don't feel that that's the original direction they wanted to go with. I think there probably was a more grander climax planned, either planned or shot with that Dreamcatcher monster, but they went with this direction, which isn't bad on a technical idea because for majority of the episode, at least in the cut we got, we hardly saw the Dreamcatcher or his face. And if we did see his face, it was very brief. So that final shot is supposed to hit the audience and resonate with them and stick with them. I think for that it works. But at the cost of that, I feel like you kind of jumbled up maybe your original idea. I've never read the original script. I would like to read it, maybe see what Catherine Boutry brought to the table, since this was the only original story that wasn't an adaptation that she provided the show. So yeah, I would love to see it. But as is, I still think that this is probably a top 5 potential. I don't know if it's going to quite hit that, but I gave this like a 4.7 out of 5, and I feel like I'm being generous on that. and I only gave it a little bit of a boost because of how it's able to be scary. And I think because it's able to be scary, I can appreciate that aspect about it, and it's really good and effective at doing that one thing. So I feel comfortable giving it that score. So that's where I'm at with it. Now, do you want to read off Spongy, and then we'll move on to Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yeah, let's read off Spongies.
Let's read off Spongy.
Alright, so here's Spongy's thoughts about the Dreamcatcher episode. This has grown into being one of the classic episodes over the years, and yeah, I think it's pretty good. It wasn't a big favorite for me back in the day, but I appreciate it more now. I like the main dynamics with Meg being this huge jerk that doesn't want Amelia to befriend Lisa. We see that she's weird for having her, or she's weird for her having friends out of jealousy or fear of being ditched. They have ex-girlfriend vibes, honestly. Lol. Happy Pride Month? Question mark. I feel they could have fleshed that out more, explained more of their backstory that this aspect hits a bit harder. Lisa does feel just kind of there though. I do love that Meg stays a jerk and goes full villain by the end and then pays the price for it. There's solid tension here, and of course, the Dreamcatcher is a creepy creature leading to a standout ending. He's not in a lot of it, but he makes the most of it. Logic isn't exactly great here, but the dream element makes that less of a big deal. It does feel like it's missing a little extra something to make it truly special for me, which is more of a me thing, as I certainly know others have different criteria, and that ending is certainly iconic. Still, it's quite good with solid dynamics and the horror in it. So he thinks he's quite good as well.
Yeah, I like that he brought up the point about the characters and how that could have been a little bit deeper than it was. I feel like on the surface of things, like Meg and what is the other girl, the friend that befriends Lisa, I forget her name. But
Amelia.
those two, yeah, Amelia, those two had a history that we only got to see the surface of. Like apparently they had a friendship that supposed to be believable, and that's why Meg is being upset with Lisa. But then it comes across later on that they just kind of focus Meg's character on just sabotaging the two of them instead of like opening up and having that you know pour out of the heart moment. And I could see where Spongy's coming with that. You could have made it a little more emotional and made it more of a tale of woe about making new friends and being abandoned and stuff. And maybe you could have tied that with the Dreamcatcher being an abandoned being stuck in the dream world. I mean, there's so much potential with that idea and the symmetry there. You could have kind of in a way made Meg the main character and had her emotions about feeling disconnected from her friend being more warming up to the Dreamcatcher indirectly. You know what I mean? So like you could have made that the motivation for the Dreamcatcher to come after Meg in particular or something like that. But it just didn't do it. And I can see why he would want something more out of it, especially when the material is there and there could be something out of it. So yeah, great point, Spongy. Anything else we want to add before we move on to Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I was just gonna say, I think Spongy makes a good point there that I think the characters do feel a little bit basic. Like I noticed that's one thing about the episode where they're very just sort of dry to the cut. Like I definitely think they could have done more with the friendship aspect. I probably wouldn't want the Dreamcatcher to get that relationship tie only because I like the fact of him being this mysterious evil figure. But I definitely think that the idea of it being this isolated camp, there could have easily been this dynamic between the three friends being in a survival situation where, hey, I know we have our differences, but we're the only people who know about this, and we're basically life or death right now. So they come together and figure out a good solution. I think that could have been a better idea. And who knows? Maybe that was something that was in the director's cut, but we'll never know. Hopefully, we get an interview with the person who wrote the script for this so we could find out if there's anything missing.
I know. You know what I think would be also a fun little shakeup if they were to like remake this instead of just the three of them being stuck in it. How about they cut everybody's dream catcher because that's the element that
Mm,
causes them to see the dream catcher. Put
yeah.
all the campers into the dream world and they can collectively as a group stand up against the monster and see what they can do there. But that's an
Yeah,
Elseworlds thing.
yeah,
It's
give it
what could
almost
have.
like a Dream Warriors kind of vibe.
Yeah, like give it
Yeah.
a Dream Warriors kind of finale to it. where they bring some stuff from the camp in the dream world. They're like, hey, we still got a campfire. Let's go get some sticks and burn this guy's lair down or something.
Yeah, and plus
For
you
some
have the
fun.
whole camp counselors being, turned into part of the Dreamcatcher in that campfire sequence. So if you had cut everybody's Dreamcatcher, you could have easily made this creature start terrorizing the entire camp, start manipulating it, and a bunch of crazy stuff. So Elseworld ideas.
There's untapped potential with Dreamcatcher, which is I think kind of a stark contrast to Are You Afraid of the Dark's episode. This might be a good lead in for this. We have the Tale of Watcher's Woods. Now, the Tale of Watcher's Woods is a classic Are You Afraid of the Dark episode that fans love to praise. And I have to say, I've only seen this episode twice, but after rewatching this for the second time, I really appreciated what Dark was able to do here. As a matter of fact, I think if we're looking at the cookie cutter idea of an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, this has all of that in it, but it's actually one of the better executed cookie cutter Dark episodes, which is ironic because we usually dog Are You Afraid of the Dark for how cookie cutter they can be and having good concepts, but they waste it. This one, I think they did something with. Was it the best thing ever? Probably not, but for Are You Afraid of the Dark, this was really solid. So the story is actually a intro episode for an iconic Midnight Society member, Sam, who plays an important role for the remainder of the first 5 seasons. She is kind of touted to be the girl of interest and the pretty girl. She's played by Joanna Garcia. And if you don't know who she is, she was on Reba, and she played Reba's daughter that had a baby as a teen. So there you go. If you want to watch something with her in it, that's not Are You Afraid of the Dark? But with that out the way, this episode is about pretty much a girl named Sarah. She goes to a new camp, a sleepaway camp. She's going to be gone for 2 weeks. It's an all-girl camp, ironically like Dreamcatcher, which is an all-girl camp too. I don't know why the coincidences are here like that, but it just is that. Well, anyway, Sam immediately does not get off on the right foot with these 3 girls. That's led by this one HBIC, Kelly. And Kelly seems to be a veteran at this camp, and she is kind of snobby and rude to Sarah because of their first interactions. And to kind of get, under her skin a little bit, they take her to the mess hall and they want to introduce her to camp legend almost off the bat. And she gets to see this weird placard, like protected by glass, that has these 3 whistles. And they have these photographs in black and white of these 3 young girls that went missing back in the 1910s. And Kelly pretty much reads off the story to her and says that these girls went missing in Watcher's Woods, and this whole camp is pretty much surrounded by the woods, and it's said to be pretty much a land of fantasy and intrigue and also horror, and it's not safe to go in there alone. So later on in the episode, the camp counselor decides to make a buddy system and have them go explore. And since Sarah is new and Kelly is a veteran, not knowing that they have this beef with each other, they unwittingly get put together, and they are now set to go wander Watcher's Woods. And Kelly's like, let's let bygones be bygones. I'll show you around, and I'll help keep you safe. But Kelly tries and attempts to ditch Sarah, but in doing so, Sarah and Kelly become lost in their own little journeys inside of Watcher's Woods. Sarah might be stalked by this Watcher, who is pretty much a wizard creature almost, with like a tree trunk body and a face that protrudes out of it. He's really creepy. He's also played by the same guy who played the main villain in Pinball Wizard. So if you like that episode, you might enjoy this here. And then Kelly, she gets lost in a maze of sorts, and she ends up at this kind of like a combine with, like, shanty huts made out of bed sheets and sticks. And she sees these weird, cages, and she's looking around, and she gets cornered by 3 old women. And these women, y'all, are haggard and scary looking. They have rotting teeth. This one lady has a missing eye with a bandage over it. This one lady pretty much looks like the witch from Wizard of Oz without the green skin, but if her skin was painted green, it would be that. Uh, and this other girl kind of looks like a decrepit doll, like similar to that old woman scene that we saw in the haunted house game. Very creepy stuff. And essentially, these women want their whistles back because they were stuck in the woods because they lost their whistles. And Kelly's like, well, I can help you get your whistles, but the women don't believe her. They think that she's lying. It reminds her they're reminded of a girl that I think tricked them to go in the woods back when they first disappeared. So Kelly legit has a arrow shot at her chest with a yellow painted X on it, like they're trying to kill her, and like it's implied that they're gonna eat her essentially. Well, it phases through her, and she kind of realizes that they can't really hurt her in the way that they plan to, so they decide to keep her until they can find out what else to do with her. Well, Sarah ends up at the encampment, discovers Kelly's situation, convinces the women that she can go get the whistles. She may or may not be able to go back after tricking the Watcher one last time to be able to leave the woods. She may get the whistles, and there's a climax that involves narrowly escaping with, the whistles intact and solving the situation. And then, of course, it's all hunky dory from there. It's Are You Afraid of the Dark? Come to expect this. And the episode ends. So, this episode, I think, quite possibly was Dark's best fantastical story I've seen them do. Where they had just, and this was a one time writer. The person who wrote this episode only ever wrote this. And I have to say and tip my hat to that person. And also, David Winning. David Winning, the director, he directed a very infamous episode, The Tale of the Long Ago Locket. Going from that to this helps your legacy, buddy. Let's just say that. I think the acting performances for Dark Standards was really good in this episode. The atmosphere was really solid as well. I like the wood setting. I like the campfire within the campfire story. It's kind of like a meta nod to Are You Afraid of the Dark at the same time, to the Midnight Society. I thought that stuff was clever. I really enjoyed the monster design of the Watcher. And there's some scenes I didn't talk about, but there's a scene when Kelly first comes into the shanty huts and she sees a pig head or a cow's head on a stick, and it's like a decapitated head with like some blood. There's legit blood on it, and it's like moving and following her. That's creepy. And then there's a scene where with the Watcher, when Sarah is trying to leave the huts to go back to get the whistles, there's a skull on the ground that rises up, and it looks so cool how they were able to pull this off. I'm guessing they took like a net and just glued a skull on top of it. But this skull looks terrifying, and it comes out of the ground and morphs into the body of this guy, and his voice gets under my skin a little bit. And I have to tip my hat to Are You Afraid of the Dark for that. They made something creepy here. Like, and they can do that from time to time. They have some really cool monsters and some really dark stories. But this one shocked me. I was not expecting it to hit that way for me. And I do like the messages of the story with Sarah and Kelly kind of having two different stories to tell. Sarah having something to prove to her peers, and Kelly having something to learn. She kind of gets punished in a way, especially where she has to put herself in the hero's shoes and dip her hand in something that she's absolutely petrified of. I guess that in a way is also her arc of kind of, getting what's coming to her and also becoming a better person. So it feels a little whole in that regard. There are some overlooked things about it that don't quite make much logical sense when you think about it, especially dealing with the Watcher. If the Watcher went out of his way, because this is how it goes in the story, they've been holding these old women hostage for all this time, blah, blah, blah. If that is the case, then why is he now letting Sarah, trick him and just leaving the woods? I feel like the Watcher's not utilized enough in the episode, and there's some things that are kind of iffy with this character. But other than stuff like that, this was pretty solid. I'd probably give this like a 4.5 out of 5 stars, which is pretty good for Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I'm giving that on a basis for that show specifically. But yeah, I really enjoyed myself with this. Anybody else want to carry on and continue? Micah or BD?
I could go.
All right, BD.
I guess this was a first time watch for me. And I think the cool thing about Watcher's Woods is I got a similar kind of feeling to when we watched The Last Dance. specifically the first half of Last Dance, where the first half of that was so creepy, so weird, so out of the ballpark for what Dark usually does that I was genuinely surprised with the good scenes in it. And this is another one that's like that. At first, I thought it was going to be your typical sort of camp story, and the way it opens up is like that typical "Are you afraid of the dark?" Hey, you got this sympathetic main character, and it's very similar to Dreamcatcher in the sense that you got this one pretentious bully girl that sort of gives her a hard time. You get introduced to the urban legend, and I saw that the urban legend was about these three kids who went missing back in the day. I'm like, oh brother, another ghost story, and I was wrong. I can say that proudly. I was wrong because this is a really creepy and ominous episode. When you get to this section of Watcher's Woods, where again it's like this combine of these three haggard witch-looking characters, that skinned cow head with the eyeball sticking out of it and that obviously menacing taxidermy whatever grin. That's horrifying, man. I was like, they allowed that in Are You Afraid of the Dark? I was like, wait, am I watching the right show for a second? That was really creepy because you got these animal like effigies that are put all around this place, and it seems like some sort of like ritualistic cult stuff. You got all these different artifacts there, these candles, these torches, and then obviously the girl starts getting threatened. They try killing her. They threaten to eat her. That fire arrow scene was pretty rad. When I saw that they pulled back this flaming arrow and painted the X on her chest, I was like, that's brutal. Before you find out that it's they're ghosts, so they can't actually harm her. That scene where she gets locked in a cage full of rodents, that was also a little bit scary. That's some borderline tame Game of Thrones methods right there. So this episode's got a lot of dark stuff in it. And the Watcher, the actual Watcher, is pretty scary when he's involved. The urban legend openly says he's a demon, which I have to give credit for. Again, this is a different dark episode. They openly say that this guy is a demon that haunts the woods. And when you see him, he basically is this, again, creepy looking quiet guy. He's got that typical eyeshadow, but he's got this shroud of like branches, like a shroud of trees that he wears over his body. And just that first line where he's like, "Welcome to my woods." That was ominous, man. Something about his voice and his delivery is creepy. That skeleton scene where this giant hulking figure of leaves rises up, and you got that again skinned face of a person, that skeleton rising up with pieces of flesh on it. That was horrifying. So there's a lot of scary stuff in this one. And then you include the fact that the main character almost got guillotined to death. So this episode was not afraid to do some dark stuff, go out of its way for breaking the corny formula. And again, I don't mind the kumbaya ending in this one because much like what we talked about in certain other episodes, I definitely think it's earned. I think that these characters go through enough tribulations and trials that they earn a kumbaya ending. And I think that you taking this one pretentious girl who's put in this situation with the three ghost women, and then taking the sympathetic character who's dealing with the Watcher, them dealing with two different entities, and then coming together to create a solution. That's a good teamwork strategy. It's a good way to basically pose two different threats on two different types of people and bring them together. So I thought that was cleverly done. So overall, I would say that this is a very good episode. I'd probably give it 8.6 out of 10. But there is one big critique that I have over it that I feel like I was going to take more points off, but I'm just going to be a little bit more forgiving. And that's that Dreamcatcher is very much a villain focused episode. When you watch Dreamcatcher, the actual boogeyman figure is a big part of the episode, big part of the urban legend, has an active role. Here, the episode is called, Watcher Woods. You got an urban legend about this demon that haunts the woods. And the Watcher is very much an afterthought of a villain in this episode, to the point that I think that he didn't even really need to be in the episode if you were to take a look at it closely. He's barely in this thing. He only has a couple of lines of dialogue. He doesn't really do anything. The main focus is on the three ghost girls. And again, the motivation as to why the Watcher does what he does, you have no idea. The fact that he's not actually an active threat, he doesn't go out of his way to actually stop the characters much. He just does some few scary scenes and then he just sort of lets the girl go. And he's very nonchalant. I mean, the girl basically, no pun intended, she bitches them out. I mean, the guy literally is like, "Hey, I'm this demon that controls the woods," and she's like, "Ooga booga fire," and then he's like, "Oh, okay, go ahead." Like, it's like, dude, what? Like, that's all it took. Just one freaking lighter match is all it takes to scare off this demon that possesses the woods on some Blair Witch shit. it just feels like wasted opportunity. And again, he just feels like he wasn't utilized. Completionist brought this up. He really is an afterthought. I don't know why the urban legend is there. I don't know why he's involved. You could have just had it that these girls went missing in some haunted woods and just made the woods its own sort of maze. Just keep him out of it. Just make it its own sort of weird setting that they got lost in and just keep it at that. So that's the main reason why I don't make it a great episode. But still, it broke some of the norms. It did some good things. So I give it an 8.6 out of 10. It's a very good episode. I suggest you go watch it. Good job, Are You Afraid of the Dark?
All right, Micah, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it kind of the unpopular opinion. I thought it was like mid kind of for me. Like upper end of mid. It wasn't like bad or anything. It was just kind of I think especially after coming off the high of Ghastly Grinner last week, I feel like this just felt kind of lackluster compared to that. Because Ghastly Grinner is much more little more horror focused, while this one is kind of that more fantasy adventure kind of thing. And in my opinion, I don't know, that just didn't work for me all that well. I'm much more of a fan of the like the hardcore horror stuff. And especially comparing it side by side with Dreamcatcher, I just feel like this kind of just left me wanting more personally in a lot of aspects to it. It has good elements. I think the three old ladies are creepy, the Watcher's creepy, as you guys have all mentioned. And like again, there's just some stuff that just kind of holds it back for me. I think Sarah's acting is pretty rough at times. Especially during like that scene when she's about to be beheaded and she like acts so nonchalant about it as if like she's not about to be killed. And like she's like begging Kelly to get her the other whistle, and she just acts like so chill. She's like, Kelly, please help me. I'm gonna. It's just like there's no urgency in the acting. I think Kelly was pretty well acted, honestly. I didn't think she was that bad. But like again, there's just a lot of stuff that they could have done better, in my opinion, and it just kind of felt bland by the end of it. So that's just kind of my idea. I probably gave it like a good 7.5 out of 10. It's still not bad, but it was just okay.
I can see that point because when we're comparing the setup of Dreamcatcher to this episode, it's almost identical. Like with the new girl coming in, and then you have these mean girls, and then they're pitted together, and then that's kind of where the similarities falter a little bit. Dreamcatcher's approach was to take these girls, put them in a situation, kind of throw them into the legend almost immediately through something nefarious one of the characters do. Here, the character, Kelly, she does something nefarious to Sarah, but the legend itself is focused, when you look at the legend, it's focused on three girls who disappeared from this demon. And the demon should be the final boss, right? When you think about an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, one of the classic examples, and I find it ironic that I'm using this because the Watcher himself was in this episode, but you have a final boss in Pinball Wizard, where the whole goal of the episode, like a dungeon crawler, is to make it through the levels, get to the end, beat the boss, beat the main bad villain. That concept is usually done in kids horror, where if you have a villain, a titular villain, especially like in Ghastly Grinner's case, what does the main character do? They have to stop the Ghastly Grinner. Here, the Watcher, you don't really feel the horror with that character. You only feel the horror, I guess, mildly existentially, mildly viscerally, through the girls pretty much being told by these women who are pretty much starved from the outside world that they're cannibals essentially. And it requires you to play more on the mind of, or how did these women get these things? How did they get this bed sheet? How do they eat? It makes you think about that stuff. And when they say and imply they're going to eat a kid, you have to think about, well, how many other kids have these women eaten? Who else has stumbled up in here? It's stuff like that. It's not outwardly trying to be scary. It's trying to be more inward with it. And I do feel that can make a good episode sometimes, but sometimes it can leave you just wanting more out of it, especially when there's room for improvement or stuff on the table. And I think we all brought up the Watcher could have been that answer. You could have put him through the episode a little bit better and possibly made him the final boss and given the episode a proper closure, but it just wasn't there. So let's read off Spongie's thoughts, because I'm kind of curious with Spongie on this one, 'Cause he sometimes can lean either way.
Let's see. All right, so here's Spongy's thoughts about the Watcher's Wood episode. Sam is introduced and she comes out swinging. This is quite the good one. It's probably the most balanced one we've had in a while. I like the setup with Sarah and this alpha bitch type as they grow closer over the course of it. A basic arc to be sure, but it's nice to see the given jerks on this show tend to stay that way. We see Kelly is somewhat jealous of Sarah for being so good at everything. I wish we got more with that as they sort of forgot about that, but it is an interesting detail. The Watcher is a creepy villain with his design and presence. Even if the effects with him are a bit goofy, he doesn't do as much as I would have liked, but he makes the most of his screen time. We mostly deal with these old ladies who are victims of the woods and think Kelly is someone who screwed them over. They were fun and tragic as well, which made it more interesting. They could have been they could have had more variety with the horror here, given the setup, but there is a solid danger and atmosphere. It keeps ramping up, which leads to a solid climax and an ending which wraps up things well. Logic isn't perfect, but like Whispering Walls, it makes up for that, and it's better thought out than that one. It could have done more in a couple places, perhaps has that jack of all trades, master of none thing going on, but that's just me. Overall, it's very balanced and quite solid for Sam's first outing. Speaking of, my biggest negatives come in the Midnight Society stuff. They make a thing of Sam being a girl, and I guess it wasn't known as gender neutral name back then, and then the male members are just horny for her being the main right away. Not a fan, not a big deal, just a tad annoying. Otherwise, good one.
Yeah, I think we brought up was when I said it was Sam's inaugural story. All the guys were like smitten with her, and it's kind of cringe, especially when you hear Frank's pickup line on Sam in this
Ooh,
episode. Oh
it's
my
rough.
god,
It's rough. And she rejected it. She rejected him hard as hell.
you can call me Samantha,
Ugh.
because she wants all of her friends to call her Sam, and the joke is, you're not my friend anymore. Um,
Ooh.
but anyway, so why don't we get into Spongy's comparison, and we'll bring that off to see which one is the victor here.
So his comparison is this one's pretty hard. They're so close and share some pros and cons. Both could flesh out some more aspects of the dynamic better and have more of the villain. Dreamcatcher uses the villain better, and having a cruel ending makes it more refreshing. But because the dynamic could be stronger, Watcher's Woods has more of a complete arc at the center, and the use of hags spices up things a bit more. It's close, but after some thought, I'll give it to Watcher's Woods. It's more balanced and feels just a bit stronger, although Dreamcatcher has plenty to like as well. Surprise win for Dark on this time.
I guess I'll share mine first because I was struggling myself before I even sat down to make reviews for these. Because when I originally watched Watcher's Woods and Dreamcatcher for this time around, I thought they were basically around the same score, and I'm like, oh crap, this is gonna be hard for me. I haven't had one this hard to do in a while. And I do agree with Spongy. He's perfectly on the money. The epicenter of Watcher's Woods with the character stuff is better than Dreamcatcher. But the Dreamcatcher uses the villain better. And if I'm being honest, if I had to pick one, which one sticks with me more, it's Dreamcatcher. And it's not because I have more history with it. I really do think that Dreamcatcher is able to stick with you more and linger in your mind because of how it executes itself. As in Watcher's Woods, it's kind of refreshing for a dark episode to be kind of cookie cutter dark, but be good at being cookie cutter dark. So I can appreciate both, but for me, I think where it counts, I'm gonna slightly give the edge to Dreamcatcher here and give Dreamcatcher my vote. Micah, I think we already know your vote, but you can share it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's Dreamcatcher. It's scarier. It's more well executed. In my opinion, it's more well executed, even if the messy editing, it has that more villain focused storyline that actually like is willing to showcase their villain and makes their villain more intimidating and make him a threat. Unlike the Watcher, who's very just kind of behind the scenes, kind of just appears a couple times, goes away. And I feel like while the hags are decent villains, like they just don't stand it. They're not nearly as memorable or iconic as Dreamcatcher is. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, good point. I do think that the Hags and the Watcher make for fun villains, but the potential is wasted on the Watcher, and the Hags I just don't feel are enough to break that balance that it should have had, in my opinion. Which leads to BD. BD, I guess you are the purveyor of whether we're going to have a tie or we're going to have a victory. So which one do you think is going to win here?
So if any of you noticed, I specifically kept the scores of these two episodes pretty much the same because I think they are pretty much neck and neck with each other. I have to commend Dark for the fact that it took some extra boundaries. It's darker than Dark usually is, no pun intended. And I like some of the story stuff. It's definitely a better story than Dreamcatcher, in my opinion, in terms of it being well rounded. The execution's better. But as I brought up, the one thing I love about Dreamcatcher is the villain focus. It really utilizes that villain quite well for what it did. It makes it the urban legend very relevant. It makes the screen time very relevant. It makes the ambiance and atmosphere tie to it. Watcher's Woods is called Watcher's Woods, and the urban legend involves the Watcher, but he's very much an afterthought in the episode. And the Hags are your typical sympathetic ghost thing. So, yes, they had a good performance, they had some good stuff in there, but I definitely felt that the Watcher being such a wasted opportunity, yet such a promoted part of the episode, is sort of a downgrade. And that's why I gave a 0.2 difference to Dreamcatcher. So Dreamcatcher wins just for the villain alone. But in terms of a story, this really could have gone either way. It could have gone to Dark. But if they would have made the Watcher a bit better, you know what? I would have given the win straight up to Dark.
I agree. I do think, for me, the only reason why I'm apprehensive of saying that Watcher's Woods is better is because there's not enough Watcher in it. There's not enough of that balance, and I feel like if it had that, Dark, you probably would have beat Haunting Hour here in a rare fashion for comparing these shows. I feel. Um, so Haunting Hour gets the victory, but as we said, they're both close. Y'all out there should go watch both of these episodes, especially if you're into camp horror. I think there's something in both of these for everyone, and there's some parts that you're really going to enjoy in both episodes. So, with that being said, now we have our discussion, and we decided just to talk about camp horror and kids horror and why it's relevant. And BD, you brought up an excellent point earlier about the aspect of camp horror and why it's, I guess, naturally appealing in kids horror especially is because it has built-in stakes. You remove parents and you put kids into a situation where they have to operate alone or along with other kids. There's no accountability or reliance on adults in the situation other than the counselors, like you said, which are usually defunct or most of the time kind of going against the kids in these stories. So in camp horror, the kids are kind of focused into a situation where you don't really find kids horror going that much, where they had to kind of from early on take the hero role. They have to take everything head on. They can't go down the "you gotta believe me" stuff that a book with a kid in their parents' home would do. They have to be self-reliant. They're often put out into the wild and the unknown, and that preys on the mind, especially while you're reading. And often than not, these characters, they come across some grisly things. They hear some terrifying urban legends that mess with their mind, that make them question reality as these things are happening to them. And they often find themselves in some really hairy situations that can be considered nightmare fuel for, especially in a kid's lens. And we talked about the original 62 and how R.L. Stine wrote 4 camp books in that original run. And over time, he actually, I think, wrote a book for Tales to Give You Goosebumps that had 3 short stories that were camp stories. Give Yourself Goosebumps had, I think, 1 or 2 camp books in there. He had a camp book in Nightmare Room, 2 camp books in Series 2000, and there's 2 camp books in Modern Goosebumps. And heck, you can even look at Are You Afraid of the Dark? There's camp books in Are You Afraid of the Dark? There's camp episodes. Haunting Hour has it too. So, in y'all's opinion, why do you think camp horror is probably next to Halloween horror the most popular? If you have anything else to add, feel free to take over.
I mean, I think it's mostly the idea, like as you mentioned, like just being away from your parents, being away from like your trusted adult figures. and then just kind of being some ways left to your own devices off in the middle of these, usually in the middle of the woods, you either in cabins, or I think it's even more effective if you're like tent camping and there's horror related to that. Like that's really unsettling to me personally, just because in a tent you're so vulnerable to stuff. This is why I think, while I'm not a huge fan of Camp Nightmare, that like whole tent camping scene was really effective for me. And it's just like, I don't know, just the idea of also just being around your like other people your age who also are very inexperienced. They don't really know kind of how to handle certain situations that could potentially be life threatening, and they don't really have that kind of, either, I don't know how to describe it, but like either mental capacity if they're like much younger age, or just they don't even have like the just the strength or the know-how to try and fight a dangerous situation. It's just a really uncomfortable and kind of unnerving thing for me personally, and that's what gets me about it.
Yeah, I think there, if I have anything else to add, it would be when you go camping, or when you go outdoors and you remove yourself from the bubble that you live in your day-to-day life out in the suburbs or in the city and stuff like that. The city can be a concrete jungle at times, don't get me wrong, but most of the time, in a perfect world, I should say, you kind of live in a protected environment. And when you put yourself out in a camp setting with no adults as a kid, you have to kind of rely on these instincts. And most kids that go camping, I would assume, don't have survival instincts. They have to be taught these things. That's why they're going to camp. They're not just going there to have fun and for experiences. They're actually going there and indirectly learning valuable things that build on their psyche, that build on their instincts, that build on their dependence of their family. It builds on their emotions, and possibly how they appreciate others at the same time. But in a camp story, in a horror setting, right, when you have urban legends being told to you, and you're made out to be true, and you're an impressionable person, it plays more on the mind. It plays more on the insecurities, even though you're there to build on your securities. And I think that's where the horror comes in, because you're kind of forced to jump those hurdles in those camp stories more than you would in a situation like, I don't know, you pick a book, any old You Gotta Believe Me book, like how let's pick the modern book, How I Met My Monster. The main character, Bean, his whole thing throughout the whole story is he wants everybody else to solve his problems because they're around, and he's used to going to them to help solve his problems. But his main roadblock is that he can't solve his own problems because he just won't get over that hurdle. In camp books, you're on your own. Bye. You got to jump those hurdles. You got to deal with it. Like in Ghost Camp, Harry, the main character, his younger brother, pretty much gets convinced by essentially a ghost cult who are, trying to steal their bodies. Essentially, mild spoiler. And the emotions that he goes through in the story, no kid should really ever have to go through this stuff, but he's going through it in an adult way, and he has to be the hero. He's automatically put into that, all right, I have to do or die, right? And that's often what camp books kind of bring out. There are some books that don't really qualify for that. I would say Jelly Jam isn't a do or die book. It's kind of predicated on the whole cult twist at the end and stuff like that. But I think Ghost Camp is probably the best example of how to do a good like a camp story, especially in kids horror, in my opinion. Another one would be Welcome to Camp Nightmare, where Billy Harlan, the reason why he's one of the most popular characters of all time is because he was never given an opportunity to not be anything else but the hero of the situation. He was the most level-headed person. Everybody looked up to him. He was kind of a pseudo leader, and he was forced to make the tough calls and the decisions. And he was forced to be the person to raise the questions when there needed to be questions raised. And that's why he sticks out, because the camp setting itself, being at Camp Night Moon, brought that out of him. So, yeah, I can see why camp stories are so popular in that regard. BD, you have anything else you want to add?
I think I was gonna say that in terms of the setting wise, I don't think I would compare it necessarily to Halloween, because I think Halloween is more so just the embodiment of the holiday, bringing on spooky stuff. But I think a good setting comparison to camp stories that I notice are also fan favorites amongst people in movies or books is Boarding School. boarding schools and camps basically have the similar thing where you're sent off to somewhere where your trusted guardian's away, you're filled with strangers, people have ulterior motives. So just people dealing with isolation as a kid is a big thing. I remember when I picked up my first horror book, which got me into horror, which was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I would be alone in my house while my mom was at work, and obviously I didn't know my neighbors. I didn't trust myself because I was like in fourth or fifth grade or even younger than that. So just that isolation alone makes you paranoid, makes you scared. So if you get sent away to a camp being with nobody you know is horrifying. And then if you find out that there's some weird shit going on, it's going to make you even more scared. Same thing, which is why boarding schools work out like Perfect School, like Tale of the Hatching. People love it just for that you're sent off somewhere that you don't want to be. And I think another reason why camp stories work so well is the fear of the woods has been around since the dawn of man. I mean, a lot of urban legends are people being afraid of the woods. If you look at Sasquatch, if you look at the Wendigo, people are scared of what might lie in the unknown. And the woods is very much an unknown setting for a lot of horror. If you look at all the camp stories, if you look at Blair Witch in adult horror, if you look at The Ritual, if you look at Friday the 13th, everybody's scared of what eldritch or weird horrors could be out in the woods. So when you got kids that are in a camp out in the middle of nowhere in the woods, it's just a perfect setting to set up some scary stuff, much like if you were on a boat stranded out in the ocean. The ocean and the woods have just been areas of urban legends and scary stuff since the beginning of, humans making culture. So I think that's why camp stories are so successful.
Yeah, I like that you brought up how isolation plays a role in it, because camps are usually, like you said, far away from everything. As a matter of fact, where I live, currently, I live now where I grew up. There is an abandoned Girl Scout camp in the woods, deep about 15 miles in the woods, and we would go there as teenagers to hang out. But there would be homeless people there, like, and I'm talking like homeless people that carried like baseball bats and knives and stuff. And we were teens. We didn't really think about that stuff. But one time we were out in there and it's dark. There's no lights in this place. The electricity shut off. It is pitch black in the woods. And we hear people talking. We hear something being banged on, and it's not us. That, just hearing that strikes that primal fear within you that I'm going to die. If I get heard, I'm going to die. If they find me, blah, 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 blah. That's what, is kind of implied with camp stories. If your cabin is compromised, your sanctity, and as a lot of these stories are, or let's say your fellow campers are monsters themselves, you don't have a real sanctum to hide and self deconstruct these emotions that are running through you. You have to like suddenly deal with that and figure out a way to get out of the situation. And often than not, these characters are put through these situations that make them kind of like John Wick, or kind of like those BA action heroes that put themselves in more adult situations than most kids' horror protagonists will ever put themselves in. Or in some cases, Stein, for example, will like to throw some supernatural or some weird science fiction stuff in there to kind of try to boost up the threat of it all. But nonetheless, it is. I think camp stories are popular because they kind of make you think on that primal level, and especially if you're able to plug yourself into these characters sometimes, of how relatable that is. And just imagining being isolated. There's no cops for you had to call the police. It's going to be about 30 minutes, 45 minutes for them to come out to you. Your parents are who knows how far away from you. You have to mail a letter to them. I mean, you're on your own. And this is kind of like teaching kids what it's like to go off to college or go off to boarding school. BD.
I was gonna say, as soon as you said mail a letter, light bulb went off, because I just remembered that there's not three stories, camp stories in Tales to Give You Goosebumps book two. There's four, and one of those that did a good job was P.S. Don't write back. So just to build off what you said, P.S. Don't write back very much covers that. Hey, if you're trying to mail letters to your family, if you're trying to get into contact with them, what if there was some entities that were messing with you? what if they decided to send you letters? What if they decided to manipulate your identity and stuff? So that's another thing that I think you made a good point on is you lose all forms of contact. The woods and camps are easy places where you're cut off from the outside world. So you have to figure out, again, everything on your own. And what you knew of the old world is gone until you make it back to society, which could be a hurtling journey for a lot of characters in these kids' horror stories.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you brought up PS Don't Write Back, because that's one of like the few kids horror stories that I've seen that involve a camp that more so involve not knowing what's going on in the outside world playing a fear, because a lot what the main character went through is that he feels abandoned in this place from his real life that he has back home in his bubble world. His bubble world is being compromised. He's now stuck out here in this camp where he has no real place, and that's the horror of it all. Like, just the sheer fact that you could be left in a place that you don't live at, out in the open, out in the vulnerable, for who knows how long, is potentially even scarier than coming across an urban legend Yeti monster that's roaming through the woods, a mile away from you. It's stuff like that. I mean, it's so versatile and it works in a lot of ways. And it's kind of a shame that there's not really that many modern camp books. I think Terror Valley, the third book, is going to be called This Way to Camp Blood, and it looks kind of like a mild, like kids horror friendly slasher in the woods type of thing. Given the cover, I might check that out. But there's not really that much. I mean, I think Monster Street had a camp book, and I think it's like the Camp of No Return or something like that. But you don't see them that much.
Ghost of Slappy was almost going to be a camp slasher book where the beginning is they drive off to the woods, they're in a camp, and then Slappy goes missing, and they swear to God they see the dummy running through like the bushes and dark trees at night around their campfire, which is like one of the best things I think I ever heard in modern Goosebumps books. And then it completely ditched that idea. So Stein, if you're listening out there, bring that back, please. We need a ventriloquist dummy slasher in the woods book.
The campier, the better. Pun intended. All right, so I think that concludes our episode tonight, episode 19. Thank you all for staying with us. If you listened to the whole thing, we really appreciate it. We're gonna have everybody's socials and all their information, where you can find their personal channels and all of that in the description section and in the comment section of this video as well. For our next episode, for episode 20, we decided to keep going with Are You Afraid of the Dark versus The Haunting Hour. And we're actually going to be facing off two, I guess, three stories that we've been really wanting to talk about, because if you're not familiar with us or you're not in our Discord, these are fan favorite episodes from these shows, and they're very close in terms of similarities and plot. We're going to be talking about The Haunting Hour's Dead Body and Dead Bodies, and we're going to be facing it off against Are You Afraid of the Dark's The Tale of the Secret Admirer. So we're kind of going more in that young adult direction, but hey, it is what it is, and these are variety shows at the end of the day, and we are excited to talk about these. So until next time, we hope that we see y'all again, and we hope that you leave a comment down in the comment section of this podcast. Which episode did you prefer? Did you prefer Dreamcatcher, or did you prefer Watcher's Woods? We are dying to know. And we'll see you next time, y'all. Take care.
Deuces.